Section 1.5, Solving Quadratics, Part 4. Now we're going to be solving by the quadratic formula. So pause the video and see if you can remember the quadratic formula. Write that down. The quadratic formula, you might remember the song to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so we just finished learning how to do completing the square, but completing the square is best used when your a value is 1. We would want to use the quadratic formula when your a value is not 1. Okay, so that would be a good time to use the quadratic formula. So we'd use completing the square when a is 1, but use quadratic formula when a is not 1. When you're using the quadratic formula, I always recommend starting with the discriminant. The discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. So if you do that part first, we substitute the values in. So we would have negative 1 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 6, which gives us 73. A positive number telling us that we're going to have 2 answers. Since it's not a perfect square though, there will be some ugly answers. And then we can complete the rest of the quadratic formula. So the opposite of b, so that would be negative 1, the opposite is 1, plus or minus, the discriminant goes underneath the radical, all over 2a, 2 times 3 is 6. So finding that discriminant first really makes it a lot simpler in solving. So please try this next one. Hit pause, write it down, solve it, and then come back and see if you got the same answer that I did. All right, so again, I'm going to find the discriminant first. B squared minus 4ac. So that's 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times 4, which equals negative 23. So we're going to get some non-real solutions this time. Stick it into the regular quadratic formula. Opposite of b plus or minus. Instead of doing that whole b squared underneath here, we just have negative 23 all over 2 times a, so that would be 4. Now this one does have a little simplifying we need to do because of that negative under the radical. We know that a negative equals an I, this is imaginary. Negative 3 plus or minus I radical 23 all over 4. And we do always want to check to see if we can be simplified. There's no perfect squares that go into 23, so that's fine. And there's nothing common between all the coefficients, so we have to leave it. We always want to double check that. Please do the same thing on this last one. I want you to write it down, hit pause, solve it, and come back. I will give you a little clue on this one. You need to have all your terms on the same side. So before you can solve it, you need to subtract 8x. And you can't just throw it in at the end. The 8x is the b term, so you have to put it in the middle when you bring it over. All right, go ahead and give it a try. So first thing I'm going to do is subtract the 8x over and put it in the right location. Then I'm going to find my discriminant. B squared minus 4ac. So I have negative 8 squared, which is the same thing as 8 squared, minus 4 times c, which is 48. So we're going to do our quadratic formula now. The opposite of b plus or minus the square root of 48 all over 2 times a. So 2 times 4 is 8. And we definitely do have some simplifying here. All right, do not simplify the 8 and the 8 right now. So if you did that, pause, erase, and come back. We need to simplify the square root of 48. Biggest perfect square that goes into 48 is 16. So that would break down to 4 radical 3. And now that you have broken down the radical, you have to look at all three coefficients, not just the two coefficients that we had to begin with. All three coefficients are important. So you need to look at the 8 and the 8, but also the 8 and the 4. Is there a number that goes into all three of them that's the same? Yes, 4 goes into all of those. So we divide them all by 4. So we would get 2 plus or minus 1, we don't have to put the 1 there, radical 3 over 2. And that's how we solve and simplify. Oh, I do want to show you when you're putting things in the computer. Let's say your answer was 1 plus or minus radical 3. You would put that in the computer by saying 1 minus the square root of 3. So remember, we use SQRT for square root, and then 1 plus the square root of 3. Put a comma in between. They'll be all on one line, not two separate lines, but just remember to use that SQRT for square root.